Hello Kerry and welcome to Blackwell's. Absolutely thrilled to have you here. You are a novelist who has recently turned your hand to non-fiction with the latest book, Lowborn. Could you kick things off by giving us a little bit of a taste of what it's about?
Yeah, of course. So Lowborn has the subtitle Growing Up, Getting Away and Returning to Britain's Poorest Towns, and that kind of sums it up really. So it's part memoir about my own upbringing, which was quite at the extreme spectrum of poverty, and then me returning to the communities across Britain I grew up in, from Aberdeen down to Norfolk, to see whether things have changed for the poorest in our country, and if not, why they haven't changed.
And what shocked you most about going back to these places? Was there anything that shocked you?
I mean, I think that the thing that was most shocking actually was how little some of them had changed. So Aberdeen, for instance, where I was born, Aberdeen has had a huge influx of oil money, and for that reason it's full of Yo Sushi and Michael Kors and bars selling kombucha. But in my old council estate, literally nothing had changed at all. And then if you add on all of the other issues like the sort of erosion of the welfare net, so universal credit, increased fees for university, a lack of good social housing, or social housing that feels safe and actually does the job that it's meant to do, then actually it paints a very dire picture for people living in those communities now.
You talk quite a lot in the book about how this was quite a difficult process for you in terms of writing. What does it feel like now to have this book out in the world, and what do you hope people gain from it?
So at first it was pretty terrifying. The first few months when I knew it was sort of making its way into the world were pretty scary, but the response has been overwhelmingly positive, and that's been really amazing actually. Someone who was brought up to kind of believe that my past was somehow shameful, or that poor people are somehow culpable for the hardships that they endure. It's been amazing to have it received with such compassion, and my hope was really to reach sort of two sets of people. One were people who my story would resonate with, who deserve to see their stories told with dignity and nuance and care on the page. And the other set of people were people who have really no idea what it is like to be poor or feel marginalised or really struggle in today's society. And I'm very lucky that it really seems to have happened. I've had emails from Tory politicians, and surprisingly enough, and likewise from women who grew up just like me, who say that it's helped them reconcile a little bit with their pasts.
I know that you've been really busy with the publicity for this book. My question is, when you finally get a bit of downtime, what are you most looking forward to read?
I've just started reviewing books sort of every month or so for the big issue. So I've got literally like a sort of great wall of china of books all the way around my bed that I'm slowly working my way through. So I'm just looking forward to getting stuck into those. I'm really, really fortunate that I think that there's a real renaissance of great working class fiction, great feminist fiction, and a lot of amazing memoir coming out that is very, very far away from sort of the much maligned misery lit of previous decades. So I'm really excited to get dug into all of that.
The publishing industry is finally waking up to the fact that working class people are out there writing really good stuff. If I asked you for your recommendations of working class writers, who would you head to?
It goes without saying Janice Galloway or Jeanette Winterson or James Kelman, anything they've written. For new writers, I'd say you couldn't go wrong with Common People, edited by Kit Duvall, which is an anthology of amazing, emerging and more established working class writers. And then also Ironopolis by Glenn James Brown, which is a wonderful multi-decade story about the sort of rise and decline of a Middlesbrough council estate.
You mentioned a love of libraries in Lowborn. Who or what were you reading at libraries that sort of propelled this love of reading that you've continued with in your life?
Do you know absolutely everything? I know Jeanette Winterson, who had a kind of similar sort of education for herself, and libraries very sensibly went along the Dewey Decimal Codes. But I just picked everything up at random, so I could be carrying home Roddy Doyle with Mary Higgins Clark, with 2 Point Horrors. I just devoured everything, you know, and that was actually a joy because it exposed me to all sorts of things that I might not have been exposed to. I credit libraries with me even being here today, and I don't mean as a writer, I mean as a live human being, like functioning in the world. And it's the saddest thing in the world, I think, to see that vital public service be eroded in the way it is.
Yeah. My next bookish question is, what's the book you give as a gift most?
That I give as a gift most. Do you know, the book I give as a gift most actually is Bird by Anne Lamont. I meet a lot of emerging writers, and a lot of women in particular, who feel like they don't have the right to write, or they feel like everything that, you know, their inner critic is so strong that even though they're very, very talented, they find it so hard to progress. And I think it's a beautiful book for reminding yourself that your story is valid, and that actually if you just take it a sentence at a time, you can move forward.
If you could sit down with any author, who would it be and why?
What a great question. Do you know, it would be Jeanette Winterson, who's been such a huge influence on my own writing. I stood next to her only a few weeks ago at a Penguin event, because we share a publisher, and I was too shy to speak to her. But next time I will. I'll be brave.
You are also an author, you are also valid. Like, you can be there too. Which literary characters do you most relate to, whether that be from books that you've read as a child or more recently?
I read All Made Up by Janice Galloway, and I felt like she was so amazing at exploring the incredible complexities amongst female relatives, so mother to daughter, sister to sister. And so that was one of the few times that I saw sort of a really, really, really complicated and nuanced portrayal of womanhood and what it means to be a woman interacting with other women on the page. And I guess one of my earliest actually was To Kill a Mockingbird, and it was Scout, because she was, you know, such a scrappy little kid, and I suppose I was reading it when I was 13, and I really wanted to be like as scrappy and brave as Scout was in difficult circumstances.
What's been the most surprising thing since the publication of Lowborn? Yeah.
The email from the Tory MP was quite surprising. What he said was, it really made me think, and I couldn't have wished for anything better. It was also selected by the Publishers Association to go on the reading list for the parliamentary summer holiday, and was given to MPs. And so I guess like that's a very surprising thing. Oh, and actually it was just reviewed as Book of the Week in Catholic Universe magazine, which I did not expect at all. And you know, it's got some content that I think that many like very religious Catholics would take issue with. But I really admire the fact that they're looking to you know, understand why things are a little bit more.
On the topic of thinking again, what are some books that you've read that have made you think differently?
I guess Chavs by Owen Jones is like a really big one, and obviously sort of really started this movement. I'd also say Poverty Safari by Darren McGarvey, who I admire enormously as both as a writer and as an activist actually. And I'd say that for both him and Owen, they've done a really good job of not just writing books, but then really finding a way to ensure they have the most positive impact. And not so much, although Jack Monroe writes amazing cookbooks, which I use almost every single week, but Jack Monroe's political writing, I think, comes from a place of compassion and warmth and enormous intelligence about why things are happening and what we can do to make them better.
Something that I struggle with as a bookseller day to day is getting the books that I think people need to read into their hands rather than the things that people want to read. How do we do that as a society? How do we convince people that they need to be reading not just about their own experiences, but more widely?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe, you know, can you trick them? Can you put the cover of Wolf Hall around them? I don't know. I think for me a lot of the case is actually just explaining to people why it's a really interesting read. Maybe, you know, I think like I definitely thought Lowborn would be a fairly niche book, but actually I think people have not just found it interesting, but they've actually quite enjoyed reading it, and that's been really helpful.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kerry. It's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Zoe.